What is up, beatboxing world? Uh, for those of you who are here anyway, we are here today with Dr. Reed Blaylock, and we're going to be looking at some funny graphs. They're fancy. So, Dr. Blaylock, if you could explain to us what we're looking at here.
Yeah. So you are right now looking at my voice. Uh, this is a program that some linguists like to use for acoustic analysis, looking at and studying sound waves, and sound properties. The program is called PRAAT, Praat, which I believe is the Dutch word for talk. Um, and it's got a whole bunch of little different pieces to it. Um, let's see. Can you see my cursor as I move it around?
Yes.
All right. So on the top is one view of sound called a waveform, um, and the waveform shows the how pressure changes over time as sound moves through space. So sound happens when air molecules are pushed back and forth, made to vibrate, and different qualities of sound happen when the air molecules are caused to vibrate in different ways. That's why clapping sounds different from kick drum, sounds different from baby screaming, sounds different from lion's roar. Um, all those sound making things start air particles moving in different ways, in different patterns. The waveform representation shows, zoom in here, it shows essentially what's happening on the microphone diaphragm. So I made this recording of my voice using my computer's basic microphone, nothing special, just what I have on my laptop. Um, and all these up and downs here represent when the little diaphragm on the microphone, which is responding to air particles moving back and forth, it's responding to getting pushed in some direction and pulled in the opposite direction. So when the membrane moves one way, uh, the signal goes more positive. And when it moves the opposite direction, the signal gets more negative. And all these back and forth, back and forth, back and forth actions represent the really complex oscillations, vibrations of the air particles striking the microphone and getting turned into a visualization of sound.
Okay. One of the things that I had asked people to do is I had asked people to give me the particular medium of recording, whether it was their phone, whether it was their mic. Now, some people answered, some people didn't.
Mm-hmm.
How can a microphone, let alone a room environment, but how can specifically a
Mm-hmm.
microphone affect
Mm-hmm.
how we're going to hear these sounds, and how do we account for that if we can?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I'm not an expert on like the intricacies of microphones, but different microphones, I believe, are going to have like their own internal processing and different sensitivities of how the air particles are moving. So there's some minutia between different microphones that may affect um, what the waveform ends up looking like. But there's a lot of bits and pieces that go into this. Um, Sort of more generally speaking, because you sort of have the microphone you have, or you can save up and buy a really nice microphone, but until you do that, you just sort of have what you have.
Right.
Um, the other big factors that contribute to your audio quality include what's happening in the room around you. Do you have a fan on? Is there a lawnmower going on outside? Is there a refrigerator humming in the background? There are tools you can use. You can buy fancy equipment to like measure how loud the ambient sound of a room is. And when you have recordings with noise in the background, you can often see those represented in the bottom view, which is called a spectrogram. You might be able to see where some of that noise hits. But so the even when you can't control your microphone, the ideal is to find a quiet space, maybe turn off lights if you have noisy lights, and get your computer fan on low, or as off as possible to try to minimize any extra noise you might have. That will let the vibrations of your voice come through as clear as possible.
Okay. So now for today, what we're doing is
Yeah.
we're looking at throat bass and vibration bass.
Hmm.
How do we know when we look at these things? Because we have a bunch of different recordings, a lot of different microphones, a lot of different voices. How do we find any consistency like in what we're looking at?
Like, how do we identify whether somebody is doing a throat bass or a vibration bass or something else? Is
And
that the question?
and or how do we identify if someone is doing those things? How do we know if ambient noises or the microphone being used is spoiling our
Mm.
interpretation of what might be happening within the sound?
Oh yeah, that's tricky. So from the scientist perspective, the ideal is that we collect recordings in a really controlled environment. Maybe you beatboxers come to the lab that I have. Maybe I'll have a sound attenuated booth, a box that has a lot of sound padding and things on it, so that we know and can calibrate for exactly the noise around. When it's a situation like this where we're getting recordings from everybody in different places, knowing what the quality of the microphone is helpful to know exactly what the recording setup is. Knowing how far away you are from the microphone, which some of the beatboxers who submitted recordings mentioned. Um, Basically, the more details you can have about the recording situation that you can have written down somewhere or spoken out loud, all that stuff can help you make some determinations about whether, say, the noise you're hearing in the background is coming from somebody's fan or is coming from breathiness in their voice.
Mhm.
Um,
Give
that said,
mhm.
someone, not me today, but someone who has spent a lot of time studying things like breathiness in the voice, and who's looked at a lot of recordings over time. I focus more on like the articulations going on inside the mouth. Um, I do acoustics in this thing as well, but it's been a while. Um, so if you look at enough recordings and develop some expertise to know what kinds of patterns you find in the voice and in room acoustics, then you begin to be able to separate things out. But it takes time and some training.
Okay. All right. So now that said, we have a ton of recordings to look at.
Yes.
And let's I think some of these questions that I have will be answered in just how you go through and make some of these observations. I'm excited because some of your notes pointed out some things that are kind of just exciting from the point of view of, I mean, there's a lot of different perspectives, and particularly, you were saying that some of these go to the bottom of the piano.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep. Vibration bass, which we're going to look at a little bit later. You know, I because of how I studied beatboxing for all of my scientific. I focused more on the movements of the tongue and the lips and the velum and the larynx, how like these things are moving around in the vocal tract. I never had a very good view of the very tiny movements and the details of what's happening in the larynx. And the MRI data that I used in order to look at the movements of the tongue and lips and everything, super helpful for getting a clear view what's happening in the vocal tract, but the audio data was always practically useless because you have the ambient noise from the MRI, which is very loud, and it sort of washes out a lot of the nuance of the beatboxing acoustics. So I haven't had much of a chance to look at and explore throat bass and vibration bass until just the last couple days with all these recordings. So I'm very excited about the chance to actually look into these things. And one thing that really excited me was to find that throat bass is kind of what I thought it was, some ventricular fold vibration, and we'll look sort of at what that means. But that vibration bass goes just absurdly low. And I would love to hear from beatboxers their perspectives on the difference between throat bass and vibration bass. But for my eyes, and we'll talk about this later, um, just looking at the acoustics in a view like this, what's plain is that vibration bass goes much lower than throat bass does. And thinking about how a beatboxer can achieve that ridiculous amount of lowness is very exciting.
Okay, so we threw some anatomy terms around. So I want
Yeah.
to pull up a laryngoscope, some laryngoscope footage, and it occurs to me that you will not be able to see this unless I share my screen. So give me one moment here.
All good.
Wanted to end the recording. Just I mean, like we're still streaming, but
Yeah.
wanted to end the recording. So let me get someone a Discord invite because what might be useful, I think, also if after the stream, folks just head over to the Discord server and we just chit chat and about the aftermath and what
Hmm.
takeaways and stuff like that. And you're welcome to come, but you're a busy
Yeah, if
dude.
I have time.
Yeah.
Love to.
Oops. Use copy button. Why does it do this all the time? Streamer mode. That's why. All right. Enable disable streamer mode. Okay. Invite to the server. Boosh. Okay. There we go. There's the Discord invite, OSUD. And then I'll enable streamer mode again. Enable. Voila. Okay. Let me get the because the vestibular folds. Oh my god, those are the false folds, right? Vestibular?
The ventricular, yeah.
Ventricular, okay. What am I thinking about with vestibular?
There are vestibules as well, I think. Um,
I always think of vestibule as like a piece of the office. Like, let
yeah,
me
right.
mosey on over to my vestibule. So, all right, let me get the footage. And my dog wants to get let up onto the bed because he is lazy. All right. Yeah, the anatomy software. Well, hold on. Let me put my dog upstairs. You cool. So the anatomy software I have doesn't do a great job of showing. Like it's great in some aspects, but in others not so much.
Yeah,
So let
that's all right.
me share my screen on Discord so you can see this. Actually, what I'll do is I'll use OBS. Yes, cam, virtual cam, boosh. And then turn on camera, OBS, virtual cam, boosh. There we go. Okay. Okay, so what we're seeing here is the are they that was a lot. But these
Wait,
from my
hold on. I'm
understanding,
still not seeing what you're seeing.
it should be on my camera.
Oh, wait, hold on. Let's. Ah, there we are. Uh-huh. Yep. Got it.
Fantastic. Okay. All right.
Oh, yeah.
So
Look at those beautiful vocal folds.
yes. So right here, if you can see my cursor, these, if I recall, are the false folds. The
That's right.
ventricular. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So these are the quote unquote true folds, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the ventri that. Say it again. Say it again for me.
So you get the true vocal folds, or just the vocal folds, the white ones, and the false or ventricular,
Ventricular.
because of
There
the
we go.
ventricles, the ventricular folds, which sort of rest on top and are pinker.
So that the fact that they're larger, it would make sense that they could thus produce a lower frequency, right? Because they can move in a bigger motion and thus provide a bigger waveform, which is to say a lower waveform or lower note, particular, right?
Yes, though it gets more complicated than that.
I would please complicate it.
So,
As though you were the one complicating it now.
well, but let's just start with when a person is doing what we might call plain or modal phonation. That's what I'm doing in this conversation to the best of my ability. My true vocal folds are vibrating, and I'm not using as much as I can in this moment, I'm trying to avoid using any ventricular fold vibration or ariepiglottal fold vibration. The ariepiglottal folds go, they're the
They're
to
right
the right and
here.
left. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So those can vibrate as well. There's lots of things in here that can do a lot of vibrating. And in my current speaking voice, I'm trying to focus just on vibration of the true vocal folds. And it's not something I can like. I can't say I'm going to pinpoint my ariepiglottal folds now and vibrate those, but I can choose different degrees of, you can call it raspiness or gravel or growl or something else.
And
And
there are no nerve endings on any of these, right? So if someone says they could feel it, what they're probably referencing is that they're feeling something around it, or right? Is that true, or how true is
I do
that? I
not know
suppose.
the answer to that.
All right,
That's a great question.
I'm pretty sure that's the case, but given
Okay,
how high a bar you kind of hold yourself to, I'm gonna wait.
sure.
I'm gonna wait on that
I'll take
assertion.
your word for it though for now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um.
I I
hmm,
can definitely say that people, in my experience, um, people tend to have less a good a sense of what's happening in their vocal tracts than they might think that they do.
yes.
And one reason for this is because what we think is happening inside our bodies when we make sound is influenced by a lot of factors. Influences of like the existence of spelling, for one thing. Influences of like social dynamics. People have different opinions about voices and accents and dialects and other kinds of things. So when I ask my students about their opinions about what's happening in their voice when they do, say, two different kinds of sounds, um, they often give answers that don't necessarily hold up when you take a scientific look and start measuring what differences are.
Right.
Um, this is not to discount what any beatboxer might feel in their voice. If it hurts, don't do it. And like your feeling about your voice is something that you should absolutely trust. But in terms of using your feeling to make a scientific claim about what must be happening inside, our feelings and the physical nuance don't always see eye to eye.
So this is one thing that I kind of drives me mad. And I've been maybe not the best in terms of how I phrase this, but one of the things that happens oftentimes is people will say, "Oh, this sound happens because this thing,"
Mm,
and I get irked because people are saying, "Well, I feel it happening there," and
hmm
I want to be very clear that if the goal is to feel it a certain way and then achieve the sound, and that works, and you are a
hmm
practitioner, then that is
hmm
ultimately far more important and far more useful than
hmm
some guy on the internet getting upset that you may or may not be correct in that, because ultimately the goal as a performer shouldn't be, is this the correct thing that I am doing? It should be,
Yeah.
are you getting the result that you want?
Yeah.
That matters more than anything.
Yeah.
But in terms of like, does what moves when you make this sound, the answer is probably a lot more than anything we're going to be discussing, because a lot of things move and a lot of things will affect the sound. So let's sort of get a little bit more specific and talk about throat bass versus vibration bass. What would move in one versus what would maybe not move in the other, and what we might be looking for. We've discussed a lot about the true folds versus the false folds. Why is that significant in vibration bass versus throat bass?
Got it. Uh, I'm gonna have to reframe the question as we go on, but that's okay.
Mm,
I also need to give an anecdote because I want to be clear that this thing about like sensation of your body is not something that is unique to artists. I, a trained scientist, was convinced when I was an undergraduate in college studying linguistics and with a background in a lot of the things that I do right now, that I had discovered a new way to make a trill sound. Beatboxers will know like a lip bass kind of sound. You can do that in three different places, basically, in languages. You can do it in your lips, your tongue tip, or the back of your tongue against your uvula, which is what happens when you're gargling or you're making a Chewbacca Wookiee sound. I was convinced that I had found a new way to do it because I could feel the vibration happening in a new place that I hadn't felt it before. I was doing a trill that I thought was a palatal trill, with my tongue body moved a lot further forward than for a uvular trill. The details here don't matter. I was wrong. I was super wrong. We got out an ultrasound. We did some imaging. This was at like a party where some linguist had an ultrasound. My
That's my
advisor.
kind of party. I don't know. I
It's
mean,
a great party.
listen, some people are wearing party hats. Their opinions are wrong. Clearly, the solution to a good party is to bring an ultrasound device. I mean, come on.
I think so. What we found out is that I was making a change in my vocal tract, but I wasn't causing something different than usual to vibrate. I was just positioning my tongue at a different angle than I had been in the previous situation. So what I felt was a difference, but I completely misattributed the origin of that difference. And this can happen to anybody and everybody.
Yeah.
So it's sort of just a lesson in caution about making claims. The best way to say with confidence that you know how something is happening in the vocal tract is to actually look.
And so, and just to be a defender of that idea, I want to make sure that we're very clear that we don't know a lot. Like, so I just want to be clear that we're not saying this so that we position ourselves as people who say that we know what we're fucking talking about. Because what makes this exciting, what makes beatboxing exciting, is we have no idea how the fuck y'all do what you do. That's why it's cool, right? So there's, to me, the value of, from the more pragmatic education point of view and learning and trying to have everyone get better, the value of putting the brakes on saying this is the thing that is happening is that we will avoid this accumulation of jargon, which we do see in the singing world, in the singing education world, where we have 1,000 words for everything, and like then people struggle to talk to one another, and then they get in arguments over whether it's falsetto or whatever. Like it's a mess, and we have an opportunity in the beatboxing world to not do that, and it could be very valuable if we pump the brakes a little bit culturally. But also, we can't always wait on for us to figure out everything, because as we're going to find out, it's really, really hard to figure out what's actually happening. And of course, beatboxing moves at a mile a second. People are coming up with literally new things seemingly every month, if not 5.
I feel so behind.
Yeah.
So I have a lot to catch up on. I'm excited to keep looking at more recordings. I wanted to start with looking at my own voice, because I have a recording of me doing a very particular thing that I worked hard to do, which is neither a vibration bass or a throat bass. But I think it's going to be useful to talk about the throat bass.
Okay. So
I'm sharing my screen right now still, I think?
Yes, I will move over to your shared screen.
Okay. So we saw the true vocal folds in your picture. And when I'm talking right now, my true vocal folds are vibrating, and you can control how fast those vibrate. And at slower vibrations, they sort of vibrate, they open from the bottom to the top and then close from the bottom to the top. We always see them from top down, but it's actually bottom to top kind of opening and closing action. So I do this with my students. And you can change a lot of the minutiae of the musculature around the vocal folds to get them to vibrate more slowly or more quickly. You can change their tension, you can change their length, you can change how far apart they are, and all these things will change the quality of the sound. I recorded myself singing the lowest note that I could manage, which turns out to be something like this. Can you is that coming through?
Yes, it's a very short recording. So,
it is a short recording.
Yeah.
Let me give a little more. This is, oh, you know what? The lowest note is over here.
I want the software so badly. Nice.
It's free to download. Anybody can have it.
Oh, I didn't know it was freeware.
Oh yeah, totally
nice.
free.
I'm totally downloading it. Yeah.
It looks, the website, the last time I checked, was not as pretty as other websites. And my students sometimes are suspicious, but as far as I know, it contains no malware and is a perfectly safe resource. So this is me singing my lowest, my very lowest note. I tried to go lower, it didn't work. And I don't know how to do throat bass. I don't know how to do vibration bass. I only know how to do a couple different things, and one of them is just true vocal fold vibration. So this is me just plain phonation at as low as I possibly can go. Um, I want to look in here. I'm just going to zoom in on a very short window of time. I'm going to go to. This is about 70 milliseconds here. This is 70 milliseconds of my voice. It's very short, very, very short. Um, but what you can see in the waveform, we're going to talk about what happens at the bottom later on. But in the waveform, you can sort of see there's all these up and down and up and down and up and down and up and down and up and down oscillations of the air particles of the microphone membrane, representing the fluctuations in the air of the sound caused by my voice. But you can also sort of see, if you look closely enough, that there are these kind of repeating patterns here. So like this one, for example, this whole thing from this like little two-humped peak to the rest of these. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then the next two-humped peak. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I think that's 8. They sort of do this cascading up and cascading down. So there's all these little vibrations, and then there's like a bigger, slower pattern that's happening. This is a complex waveform, and with my students, I would get into like the math behind how you go from the sound you get out of a tuning fork. If you put a whole bunch of tuning forks together, you get a complex wave. That's the harmonics of your voice are all individual frequencies adding together to make a complex wave. It's all mathematically like fascinating, but the main conclusion is that if you carefully measure one of these longest cycles, what did I say? 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And you select, when I say carefully, I mean I want to get like right from where this waveform crosses the zero axis here, all the way to where it crosses the zero axis at the beginning of the next cycle. So I'm going to use a little computer shortcut to like perfectly align those.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a very precise measurement now. I can see that this wave lasts for 13 milliseconds. And that turns out to be a frequency of 76 hertz. And earlier I looked up what 76 hertz was on a piano, but I've
That's
forgotten
pretty
now.
low. I believe it's a little above E. I think it might be F.
Yeah. Okay. It's like an F, but like it's like an F2, I think.
Yeah.
Not absurdly low. I'm a baritone, maybe a bass on a bad day. I mean, a good day for me being a bass, but like a bad day for my voice quality because I'm probably sick or something. But this isn't unreasonable for humans to make. But this is what I do when this is my lowest that I can get is about 76 hertz. When that's the slowest vibration my vocal folds can make. And so that's like the difference between the vocal folds doing. It's basically the vocal folds doing one opening, one closing, one opening, one closing, but they're doing one full cycle, open, close, 76 times per second. That's what this shows. We're getting, like, this measurement tells us we're looking at the vocal folds opening and closing 76 times per second. It's really, really fast.
Right. I was so off. D sharp 2.
Oh, D sharp 2. Okay,
yeah,
great.
minus 40 cents.
Fantastic. I'm just going to say this out loud. It's important to know. When your vocal folds are opening and closing, it allows air from your lungs to pass through when the vocal folds are open. And when the vocal folds close again, they block air from escaping out the lungs. So you're really releasing puffs of air, very tiny puffs of air from your lungs whenever your vocal folds open, and then blocking airflow when your vocal folds close. Puff of air, no puff of air. Puff of air, no puff of air. And that's important when we talk about throat bass. So this is me doing the lowest I can possibly do. It takes a lot of effort to get down there. I had to sing like several other notes before that. I had to do a whole. It was a lot
That's
of
not
effort.
that's not bad. Yeah.
Uh, okay, so with that in mind, the next thing to look at is I need to share a new screen. Now I'm going to do this one, I think.
So this is
Yes.
the utility in this is not only are we looking about how this software works and how you're going to be in the process of an analysis, but we're also going to be contrasting why like this is just usually your kind of stock singing. And then we're
Yeah,
gonna talk about that and how that works, and then we're gonna break it all by throwing in beatboxing, which breaks everything, which is great.
exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So here is an example of someone's throat bass. There's a longer example here.
Whose submission is this? Let's see.
This is a quick throat bass demo.
See.
I just picked
Well,
one. They're all great throat basses.
as you're doing that, I'll look through Discord and try to
Great.
find.
So the beatboxer does like some nice stuff. There's good stuff in here. It's relatively simple to my ear, but simple isn't bad. Simple is great for science because it means we can focus in on things.
Yeah, people submitted a
So
lot.
I'm looking at the first couple throat basses they do. And if we look at this second one in particular, just one kind of pulse here. I can do exactly the same thing I did with my own voice. I can zoom in to a small amount of it.
These waves are a lot more jagged in their peaks and valleys, which is probably denotes a little bit rougher of a sound, right?
I'm not going to try to say anything about it. It could be all kinds of things. But if you're finding that little jaggedness, that means that some very high frequency is present. That could be breathiness in the voice. It could be a fan. It could be something else. It depends. Like, we have a hard time seeing in that jaggedness how periodic it is. I don't know. This at a certain point, the microphone can't pick up all the nuance.
Sure.
So it's
And
hard to say
bit rate
exactly what's
has
going on there.
yeah, like bit rate has a the compression of the medium, etc. has is of consequence here as well.
Yep, absolutely. The jaggedness does help us identify where cycles begin and end. So, like, I can see if I look across these, and I've been doing this for a while, so I have a good sense of where these things are now, just from experience. I could look at a pattern like this here. Big up, tall up, wide up, and then tall again. And then a big drop down, tall, wide, big drop down, tall, wide, big drop down. That's sort of the overarching pattern here. And I can also see there's like the wider ones are more jagged. That's consistent across all of these. So whether I make my measurement here or off to the right somehow, I should expect to find similar results. I'll pick this one in the middle. I'm going to actually, yeah, I'll just leave it here. So I'm going to select, and I'm going to make as precise a selection as I can by trying to maneuver this so that I'm selecting where the waveform goes across the zero line, going upward at the beginning and end of the cycle. And this beatboxer throat bass is working at 77 hertz, which is basically the same as the 76 hertz that I was doing in my voice earlier, except that this beatboxer is doing a throat bass, not plain vibration. And so the reason I'm contrasting my voice and the beatboxers is to say the difference between throat bass and plain vibration isn't just making the voice extra low. it's actually a difference in the sound quality that creates some extra lowness, but it's caused by a different set of vibrating structures. So rather than just the true focal folds vibrating in plain voicing and plain phonation, for a throat bass, the vocal folds are vibrating, but also vibrating above them are the false vocal folds. There's two vibrating things happening in a throat bass instead of just one in plain voicing.
And you know this because I believe that we didn't discuss this, but you sent me papers on Mongolian throat singing, and so this is an observed phenomena that is people have
Yes.
gone through the
Yes.
trouble of finding this. Okay.
Yes. And I can show you some of these things, including a nice example from one of the beatboxers. Um, I want to just see.
That's a good correction for me because I thought it was a matter of like a vocal fry. Um, and it might be, but I didn't realize the ventricular folds were
Well, and you know, what is vocal fry anyway? Depends on who you ask and what's involved. And
that
I'm not an
is
expert on fry, so I'm not going to try to get into that. I'm going to focus on,
that
on
is the
throat
most
bass today.
that is the most scientist answer. Well, it depends on what you call a vocal fry.
Well, and that's
It's
such
accurate. It's an accurate statement. I'm just yeah.
it's such a big part of it because and this is a huge issue for other vocal arts communities outside of beatboxing and in beatboxing too, that you have the scientists and you have the practitioners, and sometimes they're the same people and sometimes they're not, and the scientists have their perspective and the vocal artists have their perspective, and sometimes the scientific terms end up being defined on different qualities than the artist terms. And sometimes the artist terms are like you have 10 different definitions for vocal fry, and
Yeah.
like if you asked a room full of people, they might all say it's something different, and the scientists might agree with each other more, or maybe they don't. But like the definitions for these things in different communities make it formed differently, and then if they try to cross over, then you have the whole thing's a mess. I'm not going to talk about vocal fry because that one has a lot of baggage.
You say you treat that word the way that I think a lot of voice people treat the word falsetto. Everyone
Oh yeah.
the second falsetto comes around, everyone ducks and covers. Like it's the
So I
four-letter
mean,
word.
you know, I asked my students to like go online and look at YouTube and come back to me and tell me how many different vocal registers they hear people advocating for, and I get answers from 0 to 12.
Yep.
And these are questions that science may dream of answering, but it's a question of aesthetics and physicality and finding where they meet and finding the nuance and the gray areas, and we're still very much exploring those,
The word
and it's
continuum has become one of my favorites.
it's a good word.
It's a
It's a
cop
good
out
word.
in a lot of ways, but it also, yeah, yeah, continuum.
Uh,
Anyway,
Let me. Okay. So I'm gonna do. I'm gonna switch now to another recording. Let me make sure that this one is the one that I want.
No.
Yeah. Okay. Um. So. Changing. Okay. So
oh, that's
this
clean.
is, I think, a second beatboxer, a different beatboxer, who also submitted a demonstration of throat bass. But they were kind enough to not just do throat bass, but also do some beat rhyming as well, along with the whole thing.
I wanted to
So,
point out something real quick. I want to point
oh
to the
yeah,
spectrogram. So the
yes,
spectrogram, if we've noticed so far, a lot of it is a little fuzzy, and yet this demonstration has a lot of very clean lines.
yeah, that's my fault. The other ones I'm showing from I was showing from 0 hertz to 10,000 hertz because I wanted to
Gotcha.
see what the energy was happening up top, and I forgot to change it back. This one, it's very helpful, but we're gonna look at 0 to just 1,000 hertz now. So we're looking only at a tenth of the view on the bottom of what we saw before.
Okay.
Because first I wanted to measure the waveform cycles, and then we'll see what that looks like here in the spectrogram. Here's 5 seconds of beat rhyming.
Play the things of piano.
I like it. So we're gonna focus on this one little segment here.
Piano.
It's just the word bin.
A lot
with
of
an O at
resonance
the end.
on this particular Beatboxers throat bass is really clean and resonant. You can see the overtone series in the spectrogram quite clearly.
Yes. You can see it in the other ones too, because the other ones
Okay.
were only fuzzy because they were squashed. But it is very nice and clear. And we're gonna get to that, I promise. So this audio recording, and this is one of the reasons I love this tool. This section, if you just listen to it all this 1 second all at once,
Piano.
it's the word bin, O, it's bin followed by O, and it sounds like a lot of it has throat bass in it.
Piano.
But if you start looking at tiny little chunks of it, it turns out that at the very beginning, we don't have throat bass. Contrasted with just a few milliseconds later.
That comes in pretty quick versus when it doesn't.
Yeah.
I would imagine the transition to have been actually a lot slower than that.
Beatboxers are amazing. And often there isn't any transition at all. You just jump right in with your throat bass. The skill, okay, so part of what makes a good beatboxer is being able to control the difference between plain phonation and throat bass, and being able to introduce your throat bass in the timing that you want, whether that's fast or slow or whatever. That's control and precision right there. And the more under your control it is, the more skill you have.
Still impressive. I wouldn't have imagined it's a matter of milliseconds of
milliseconds. Yeah. It's nuts. Okay, so let's. I'm gonna play again because I want to make sure we're all on the same page. Plain voicing, just the vocal folds vibrating, followed shortly by throat bass. And you can hear the one coming in after the other. You hear the plain becoming that gravelly throat bass sound.
Yeah.
And if we zoom in on this, I can make a selection early on. I can look at, I'm just focus on the first half here. I can pick a cycle like this one. No, let's do it here. This is a cycle of plain voicing. And I'm actually too far out for that to work. Okay, so same cycle I selected there. The vocal folds are vibrating about 175 cycles per second, which is, by the way, super fast. It's not even close to as fast as the vocal folds can vibrate if you're like a soprano or something, but it's try to do anything 175 times in 1 second. It's very hard. The vocal folds are just awesome. So that's how fast the vocal folds are vibrating in this plain voicing situation. If we zoom out some, here's, I don't want us to get lost. We're at bin. This is the I part. If I dive into the throat bass part, I can make another selection here. And now we see that we're getting vibrations closer to 80 hertz, 80 vibrations per second. Now, this part is really, really important. This is the thing that makes the throat bass. The plain voicing, the what we saw before, this earlier part, that doesn't go away. the vocal folds are still vibrating exactly that quickly. They're still vibrating at, what did I say, 160 hertz, 175. They're still vibrating just that fast. What happens is that the false vocal folds show up and start doing their own vibration in the throat base area. And the false vocal folds, the ventricular folds, are doing a vibration. I gotta make sure I say this just right. They're doing a vibration that causes half the time the false vocal folds to come together, blocking the air that's coming up between the vocal folds. The vocal folds open, a puff of air comes out, and then close, and the air stops. They open, puff of air comes out, and close, the air stops. If the false vocal folds are above them, closing and opening, then sometimes when the false vocal folds come together, they'll block the puff of air that the vocal folds allowed through.
I'm going to show. So one of the things that
Yeah.
it was not great about the scope of the laryngoscope is that we don't see exactly in that shot how that happens. So I'm going to get the anatomy up. Give me a second here.
Yes, I'm going to send you a video that does show that. One of them here. Can I put it in?
Well, I do have the anatomy up. All right.
Let's see.
I always feel bad I have to decapitate this poor bastard. Okay, because it'll a lot of this laryngoscope stuff can be it can be a little deceptive in that you don't get a totally good picture of what's possible. All right.
Right.
So we'll look at other laryngoscope footage, but for right now, these are the true folds, and these are the false folds right here. And so what we're seeing, what Dr. Blaylock is talking about, is that these will oscillate, these true folds, and then these will also oscillate and come together and oscillate in their own fashion.
Right.
That's wild. So okay, and you have actual laryngoscope footage of this.
So, because I was really excited to look at this stuff. So yeah, I sent it to you in Discord just now in our chat. So the video I sent you is not beatboxing. It's not the throat bass, because the throat bass video that I found is much blurrier. So this is Kagura. This is throat singing from a totally different genre of music. But
it's in slow-mo? Oh, that's awesome.
Because it was recorded at like 10 billion frames per second.
Oh, that's amazing.
So
that's so cool.
It's a really nice video, right?
That's so cool.
Yeah,
you would struggle to find. Oh my god, that's so cool.
This is a video that was released. There's 16 other videos just like it for other different vocal styles that they recorded with a very high-speed camera. This paper was just released, I think, a couple months ago. I think it's from 2025. And I don't know if the whole paper is open access or not. I have to double check. But they made these videos available when you get the paper.
So, but there was a question of the false folds are slower and cause. So this individual used the term destructive interference. I would say probably distortion is what the term I would use is, but it seems like it's hard to give a term to the phenomena because it's so unique.
Yeah. Destructive interference is a very specific word in my field, at least, for when things are canceling each other out.
And this is adding sound. So,
well, it's kind of canceling.
Yeah, there's some phase cancellation, I would imagine, right? But
yes, I'd have to think about whether destructive interference works as a word here. I'll have to think about that for a while. I think another way to think about it is just I love thinking about airflow. I think that's a very helpful way to think about things because you have been breathing since you were born, I hope. And so, like, breath coming into and out of the body is something that humans are intimately familiar with. It's something that beatboxers have to control a lot. And so it's something you kind of have an intuition about, that breath is exiting the body or it's entering the body. And there are things that you can do to stop airflow going one way or another. And beatboxing and speech are all about controlling airflow in a whole lot of different ways. When you're doing a kick drum, we talked about this last time. When you're doing a kick drum, you're deciding to control airflow by changing pressure with your larynx, and it's building up behind your lips. When you're doing inward versus outward, you're choosing whether the air is going into your lungs or out of your lungs and out of your body. And when you're doing different kinds of basses or vocalizations, you're controlling how the air is interacting with your body.
So on that note, actually, I wanted to talk about because this is something that is interesting to see it in action in terms of the cause and effect. So the way that one of the ways that the I would let's just say one of the ways that the vocal folds come together is going to be the Bernoulli effect, right? That's a fair statement.
Uh,
Air
the
air
Bernoulli
pass.
effect, I think, is the classic story that we may be disagreeing with now as we go forward. But yes, it's a useful story.
So okay, the as air goes through the space in the folds,
Yeah,
the responses that the folds come together, right?
yeah.
That's okay. We can
And that's the Bernoulli effect. When you increase the velocity of the air coming through, it decreases the pressure on the sides and sucks the vocal folds together. That's the Bernoulli effect story.
okay. I'm interested in that because that if that's changed or if there's disagreement on that, then I would like to
There's
know.
there's like the myoelastic aerodynamic theory. There's you can describe it a lot of different ways. I
Okay,
like the Bernoulli effect story. I think it's a very useful story.
it's simplistic enough.
Yeah,
So one thing I wanted to point out is that notice how the false folds, the larger ones, are coming
the ones on
together.
top.
The
I
ones
want
on
to.
top.
I think that's. I'd like to. I'm not trying to interrupt you, but I
No,
am.
sure.
I like
Okay.
thinking the false vocal folds is the one that are sitting on top,
Okay.
because the true vocal folds are coming together here, and like they're making a full closure. The false vocal folds aren't, and so in that sense, like the true vocal folds are bringing more mass together toward the center, and so they could be confused for being the larger ones.
Gotcha. Okay. That's a good observation. So one of the things that I see is that as the true vocal folds are closed, the false folds actually stop coming together. That's why I bring up the Bernoulli effect. So
Ah,
the false folds only start to come together as there's an opening in between. Um,
if you look, that's a good observation. If you look closely, you can sort of see that the false vocal folds are doing two actions. So there's the one with the vocal folds. There's like a small movement in, and then a larger movement in. They sort of whoa, whoa,
yeah,
whoa, 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 whoa. Um, and they do their sort of half movement in when the vocal folds close, and then they do their full movement in then when the vocal folds are open. So they're full, half
right.
full. And
So
I'm not
this is
going to
what
sit
you're
here and
saying.
pretend I can explain to you how and why the ventricular folds are doing the vibration the way that they are. But there's something important about the fact that the false vocal folds and the true vocal folds are in really close proximity to each other.
Right.
They're not. There's actually a little space. There's a ventricle, a little space between the false vocal folds and the true vocal folds, but they're so close together in your body that the vibrations of the vocal folds, the true vocal folds on bottom, contribute to setting the false vocal folds into their own vibration. And so the vibrations of the false vocal folds kind of follow the vibrations of the true vocal folds.
For scale, and correct me if I'm
Mm-hmm.
wrong on this. So your pinky nail is probably a decent. If you're a woman, maybe your thumbnail. If you're a male, is about the circumference of not the circumference. Is when both vocal folds are put together and you're looking from top down. That's roughly the size of what we're talking about, correct?
Oh yeah. I hear
It's
people describing like the size of the vocal folds like the size of a nickel
a
or a
nickel
quarter
or a dime, but we got a lot of Europeans in the beatboxing
oh yeah,
community.
sure, right.
So
Okay, you know,
yeah,
of course, of course, of course, of course. Yeah. Um, it's small. It's
it's
real
very
small.
tiny.
Yeah. Um,
So
so
then,
the fact that they're doing this complicated stuff is kind of because they're so tiny, and it's also just amazing that something so tiny can do all of this. Um,
now this
yeah.
to me is like pardon the lack of patience. If this is throat bass, what the hell is vibration bass?
Okay. Okay. Great question. Um,
The answer is I imagine we
let's
don't know.
well let's focus on. I want to repeat the story a little bit.
Okay.
See if I can get the whole thing done before we do vibration bass. Because vibration bass, the story might be related to the throat bass story. Um, in throat bass, the true vocal folds are vibrating, and then the false vocal folds on top of the true vocal folds are also doing their own vibration. The false vocal folds do a vibration that's at a similar frequency to the true vocal folds, and they do one that's half as often. So every other true vocal fold vibration, the false vocal folds come together for a somewhat full closure. And when they do, it's timed so that the vocal folds are open, but the false vocal folds are closed. And when the true vocal folds are open, but the false vocal folds are closed, no air can get through. Like it gets through the vocal folds, but it gets blocked by the false folds. And the frequency at which air is allowed to escape the vocal tract and get to a microphone is the frequency that we measure in our audio recording, and it's related to the frequencies that we hear in our ears, and it's related to the harmonics that we perceive. So if the false vocal folds are doing this vibration that cuts off airflow every other time that the vocal folds are open, then the true vocal folds can be vibrating at like a really like medium frequency, but the voice is going to sound a lot lower because air is only getting to the ear half as often. And
Gotcha.
that's what makes the whole thing be a throat bass. It's that the false vocal folds are cutting in half how much air gets through, and they have a very distinctive audio quality that's different, or it creates this distinctive audio quality that's different from when I use just my true vocal folds to make only puffs of air come through very slowly. So the throat bass is this combination of distinctive quality in the vibration caused by the use of the false vocal folds, and it's turning your fundamental frequency, the lowest vibration that you get, into half of what the true vocal folds are doing by blocking airflow intermittently. Half. Vibration bass.
Very specifically half. That's interesting.
Very specifically half.
That's kind
That's
of
what
a
they
wild,
found. That's
very,
what. So in that video that we just showed, that's of throat singing. That's the Kagura style. They find the same thing for beatboxing for the throat bass, but it's a blurrier video, so I didn't want to show people that
Sure.
one. But it's more or less the same thing. Vibration bass. I do not have a video of the vocal folds doing vibration bass. I do not know if one exists. Maybe one does, and I just haven't seen it yet. But when I look at the acoustics for vibration bass, I see something that's even lower than the fundamental for throat bass. And it looks, based on the recording, one of the recordings I saw, like it's more like a third as fast, as if the false vocal folds are vibrating 3 times for every true vocal fold vibration instead of twice for every vocal fold vibration.
Would it be fair to say then that it is very possible that it is not a change in musculature in terms of what is being used, but it could very well be a change in the use and execution and the of the same bits and bobs that are responsible. So
More or less, yes.
okay.
I don't know anything about muscles, but yes,
Well,
it could be.
whatever the bits of anatomy that we might be referring to.
Yeah.
So
It seems my initial impression is that vibration bass is the same bits as throat bass, but used slightly differently.
that's going to blow a lot of people's minds, I feel. It blows my mind because it's such a dramatically different sound that you would imagine, or at least I mean I imagine that it's so different that something physically like like there must be a different muscle, there must be a different thing
Mm-hmm.
that is being used because the sound of is it wah, whoa, whoa, which is
Mm-hmm.
vibration, and then I don't even remember if I can do hey, wah, wah, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. It's a different sound. It's in a dramatic way.
And let's be clear, number one, I don't know anything. And I can know a couple things, but I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah.
Two, there's more in the vocal tract that could be happening that can cause other kinds of changes that give distinctive qualities to the sound beyond just the vocal fold and ventricular fold vibrations. There's so many varieties of things that all this stuff in here can do, all this laryngeal stuff. I mean, heavy metal, like extreme vocalists and beatboxers, as you explore, as you try new things, people figure this out. There's so much variety that you can do. And it's controlled by what's happening by all the different pieces of the larynx and also by all the resonance of the vocal tract. That creates very different kinds of sounds, even if you can make changes up top that don't really affect what's going on in the larynx, like how those things are vibrating, but the sounds to the ear may be totally different. And so it's hard to say what exactly the distinctive qualities of a vibration bass are in addition to or instead of some of the qualities of a throat bass.
Do you happen to have? Because I know you said that you have some party tricks where you get a sonogram out. I'm curious if you just happen to have a friend with a laryngoscope and a high speed camera laryngoscopy.
No. Well, I mean, if I have that friend, they haven't yet offered me use of their laryngoscope. That would be nice.
Can you really call someone a friend if they don't offer you access to their high speed camera laryngoscope? I mean, come on.
If they'll let me cry on their shoulder, then I think that's enough.
Okay, listen. All right. You and I have different standards for friendship. That's fine. That's fine. You can have your incorrect, emotionally supportive notion. I'm gonna hold true with the real standard of friendship.
That's okay. My relationships are wrong. That's fine. Whatever.
That's objectively.
Can I show you the vibration bass that really got me?
Go for it. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Let me.
So let's see if I can get it up here. I believe it's this one. Yeah. I don't know who any of the beatboxers are who did any of these recordings, which is kind of nice for me. I'm just kind of going in blind and just trusting that it's legitimate, good beatboxing. It's nice to know who people are, but anonymity is also nice too. It makes me not be so evaluative of quality, which is good for me, but maybe not so good for beatboxers.
We have a lot of different sounds, which is going to be nice because we'll be able to, whenever we put this together on whether it be your website or some sort of hosted thing, we'll figure it out.
Yeah.
But it'll be nice that there'll be a lot of different examples.
Absolutely. I'm going to play a snippet of this 7-second recording. I'm only playing part of it because the end gets very loud. And I don't know what this is going to do to everybody's speakers. You can hear it building up, right? And then just the amplitude skyrockets. Listen closely to this. This, I believe, is a vibration bass.
Yeah.
And if we zoom in, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No. That was a car passing through.
Oh, got it. Okay. If we zoom into the beginning, there's sort of there's this moment at the beginning where you can hear the beatboxer settling into what's going on, settling into the vibration base. That settling happens here. The vocal folds warming up, getting in gear, and then the vibration base follows. So if we look at this first, if you look at the spectrogram, we haven't talked about what a spectrogram is and what it does. It's different from the last ones. Now we're looking at 0 hertz to 500 hertz. I had to zoom in really far to be able to count the harmonics clearly, but we haven't done that today. And so I just want, in case you're following along with the spectrogram, it's a different frequency view than before. But if we look at the waveform for just the first part, and we hone in on just one. Oh, you know what? That's too far out. If we go and zoom into and just look at one cycle, we're looking at a vibration of about 70 hertz. That's in the ballpark of what we saw before with throat bass.
Mm-hmm.
And when I looked at the throat bass examples, I looked at a couple, but they tended to hover around 70 to 80 hertz, the throat bass examples. It kind of depends on what the vibration of the true vocal folds is. The next section of the vocal folds getting in gear
That is
this
a
one.
lot different, yeah.
It's very different. And it's quiet, but if you listen, this is plain voicing.
Yeah.
This is just the true vocal folds. And if we zoom in here and measure the frequency of one cycle, or that we measure the length of one cycle and do some math to find the frequency, and the program does the math automatically, we're looking at about 105 hertz. So this beatboxer, 105 hertz, about 100 hertz. This beatboxer, as they're warming up and getting in gear, is getting their vocal folds vibrating at about 100 hertz. We're going to assume that when they start doing vibration bass next, their vocal folds are still vibrating at about 100 hertz. There's going to be some changes probably, but we're going to assume that it's just about that.
Yeah.
So they had what seems like a throat bass initially, and then they're plain voicing, and then there's this little transition period before you get to the vibration bass here,
That's such
which
a
is hard to
sound.
distinguish from the lawnmower that's going on outside.
Yeah.
If we look at the cycles here, I'm going to look for big dips and big peaks here. That's a good way to sort of know I'm getting the beginning of a fresh cycle. If I zoom in, just zoom in on these three. So all this seems to be one cycle. All this seems to be another. We've got like 5 little peaks and then 2 big peaks. 5 peaks, 2 peaks. 4 or 5 peaks here, 2 peaks. All that whole thing repeated is one cycle here. And if I select this and get a little precise, the program tells me that this is happening at 35 hertz, 35 vibrations per second.
That's low. That's
It's
very
low. That's low.
That's a C sharp 1.
I think it's a C sharp 0. Like,
Let me see.
maybe it's not a 0. Maybe that's crazy. Whatever.
It's the
This one is the bottom of the piano.
It's the bottom of the piano. That's
It's the
extremely
very
low.
bottom.
Yeah.
The human ear, when it's in its like healthiest condition, which it's not if you don't wear ear protection when you go to like a concert or something, but the human ear in its ideal form can hear vibrations as low as 20 hertz and up to 20,000 hertz. 34 hertz is not very far off from 20 hertz, and our sensitivity is not great down there. We're getting close to infrasonic. We're getting close to you can feel it more in your chest than you can feel it in your ears. My resting heart rate is like 60 beats per minute. No, that's per minute. Never mind. Minute doesn't count. It's like 1 vibration per second. This is only 35 times more than that. It's very slow. The vocal folds are amazing because they can do so much so fast. It's really amazing if you can get your body to create something this slow using stuff that's built to go fast. And that's vibration bass. The thing about vibration bass is I don't know what exactly is going on, but the best story I've come up with in my research here is that there are some tales, some examples in the scientific literature of people doing. Oh, I shouldn't have minimized that.
No,
There
you're
are some
fine.
examples of people doing ventricular fold vibration of their false vocal folds at 1/3. No, yeah, at 1/3 the vibration of the true vocal folds, which I get the ratios all mixed up. The end result is that it causes air to escape the whole larynx area uh, at a very slow frequency, at 1/3 the rate of the true vocal folds opening and closing.
There's
So the true vocal folds might be going at 100 hertz,
Mhm.
but because of whatever the false vocal folds are doing, the puffs of air that are let through by the true vocal folds, only 1 out of 3 of those is actually making it all the way out of the vocal tract to somebody's ear.
And that's what ends up creating. So it could even be that. Well, no, because every movement of everything is going to affect the sound because acoustics is kind of insane.
Yeah.
So yeah, so one of the things that I try to do as an experiment whenever I do vibration bass is that on a microphone, if I'm making content, like, most playback systems don't go that low. So
Mm-hmm.
if I'm hitting at like 30 and someone doesn't have a subwoofer, they're not really getting a good impression of what the power of the actual sound is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I will try to do what I do in opera. And I know we preface this entire stream by saying, people don't always know what they're doing.
Yeah.
I think I am
Uh-huh.
contracting my aryepiglottic muscles, and in an effort to kind of bring in a little bit more of a higher pitch, as I would in opera, to get
Hmm.
tenor squillo. So if I'm doing vibration bass, I'll contract, and that's the higher end there. When I contract the AES to get squillo, in my mind, this is what I'm thinking as a
Sure.
practitioner.
Sure.
I'm not. I don't know.
Yeah.
The nasal sound. That's the AES contraction. Again, to my
Okay.
mind, right? I don't know.
Okay. And as you said, whatever helps you get the sound you're looking for is a great way to think about it.
Yeah, but just the reason I bring it up is because, like, there's so much that's going on, even beyond with what just we're talking about, that you can change the shape of your vowel. Change your oral cavity. You can move your tongue forward, backward. You can change the sound in a lot of ways. But the basic pitch to get the bass part of the bass is that we're talking about using your false folds in such a way that they just oscillate in a much slower capacity. So, wow. Okay.
Yeah. And thinking about beatboxer skill, thinking outside the voice in terms of motor control, just like how humans move. Sometimes we think about things in terms of ratios. If you're doing 2 movements at once, say one movement with one hand and another movement with another hand, the smaller, smaller is not the right word. Different ratios are different amounts of complex. And overall, the smaller the integers in your ratio, the easier it is to do what you're doing. Here's what I mean. I can move my hands in sync. That's 1-to-1. My hands are moving, like my right hand and my left hand are both moving at the same frequency in the same phase. I could do the same frequency, different phases,
Right. Okay.
But we're going to focus on the same phase. 1 to 2 is slightly harder. 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2. I already screwed up a little bit. 1 to 3 is harder still. 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3.
Right.
Trying to do something where you change the 1 as well is also harder. So like a 3 on 2 or a 4 on 5, doing something
Complex
polyrhythmic.
meter, yeah.
That becomes very hard. You like skilled drummers do these things very well. Skilled vocal artists, skilled artists can do polyrhythmic things, and that's changing sort of the what the integers are in your ratio. Your 1 to 3 becomes 4 to 3, and then suddenly you're doing something that's very cool and interesting. 1 to 3 with my hands maybe doesn't feel that complicated, but to try to get your little ventricular folds to switch from doing a 1 to 2, which is what's happening in your throat bass, to a 1 to 3, which is what's happening in a vibration bass, is not an easy feat.
Could this be the result of a thyroid cartilage tilting forward? Out of
No
curiosity. Okay.
I-
Yeah. I'm wondering.
Why do you hypothesize this?
So it seems like finding vibration bass for me was a lot easier than it is for a lot of beatboxers. But I also have had a massive career with opera singing. You almost entirely have your thyroid cartilage tilted forward the entire time because it helps with projection. You get a deeper sound, vibrato, right? So, like obviously me pointing to my larynx and doing it right now. It's like hardly demonstrative, like ironclad, but like when I try to go vibration, immediately I just think, I don't know, I do the same thing that I would in opera when I would tilt. And I have a hard time getting that sound without tilting my larynx forward.
Interesting.
So and again, this is completely, conjecture. But
we could find a way to try to measure how much larynx tilting there is, if any, and if the story is working for you, then it's working.
Right.
To your broader point, it seems my like overarching perspective is that things in this world are often not so different as they may seem. What makes a good opera singer is not that different in some ways from what makes a good beatboxer. The physical principles are all the same. The vocal tract doesn't work differently when you're singing an opera than when you're singing, or when you're doing beatboxing, or when you're doing metal. What's different is how you apply some of the specific nuance, but resonance still exists.
Yeah.
And vibrations still exist, and having control over all the same kinds of things, but using them in different ways is what makes the different art forms what they are. And so, like, when you have a good kick drum, I think when you have good bassy resonance in your beatboxing, I think it's often similar. I haven't measured this, but I wouldn't be surprised to find that it's similar to what you get when you have good resonance in operatic singing. You've just created more space in order to be able to emphasize certain frequencies. And likewise, I wouldn't be surprised if some of the manipulations that somebody might do in operatic singing with their larynx, tilting, or other kinds of things also apply in beatboxing to get similar qualities of sound. Because the physical mechanisms, it's also the same instrument.
How uncommon is this? Is where I'm just gonna basically cut to the chase and ask, like, how do I who's got a high speed Laryngiscope? Raise your hand, right? You know what I mean? Like, how do I go and get scoped and get this footage to you? Because this is, correct me if I'm wrong. What you're basically suggesting is a hypothesis based on everything you've seen, that you hypothesize that the ventricular folds are moving at a third of the rate as opposed to throat bass, which is half the rate.
Yeah, because, and the reason it's a hypothesis and not a dirty guess or like crazy speculation is because when I started looking at these things, I, who have some scientific background, went into the scientific literature and searched for some very specific things and found some people talking about the phenomenon of the ventricular folds doing this kind of vibration ratio.
Right.
Nobody talked about vibration base, but they talked about something similar, which makes me think that maybe that's what vibration base could be.
Right.
So
Yeah, I'm trying to, and to be clear, I'm trying to use
Yeah.
the term hypothesis very
Yes.
deliberately in such a way that, like, yeah, it's not wild speculation. It's
Right.
It's also not like the facts or the truth. It's based on everything you've seen, and you've seen a
Yep.
lot. This is
Yes.
likely, you would think, might be a good, solid explanation with logical consistency. Yeah.
Yes, you said that very well, and you used hypothesis great before. I wanted to say more words about it because I wanted to make sure everybody else understands why we're picking
Because
hypothesis
sometimes,
and not
even
some other words.
and then people will say theory, and it's like, well, theory's got a high bar, guys. Like
That's
theory's,
a different
it takes a
thing.
lot to get there. Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yes, I think that this is a reasonable hypothesis, and I would love for somebody smarter than me to tell me how wrong I am. But maybe it's also true.
So in other words, gauntlet thrown.
Yeah.
We're gonna
exactly.
get. Listen, some people do internet debates with politics and abortions, okay, and other controversial topic matter with a lot of passion heated. No, we're here to talk about the real drama, okay? We're here to talk about the ventricular folds, and we're gonna get spicy. Okay, there's going to be a versus thumbnail there's going to be blue, there's going to be lightning bolts, probably some fire in the thumbnail.
Oh,
It's
lightning
going to be,
bolts.
it's going to harm. People might cry. It's going to get bad.
Yeah, great.
So
perfect.
I can't help now but wonder. Like, I really do want to go to the next step. Is like, we have this hypothesis. Who could I go to for if would it need to be funded? Would anyone like spare their time? And I would travel to try and get this scoped, but we would probably need a high speed camera and I imagine that this particular equipment is specific and very particular.
That's probably true. A lot of, the technology just keeps improving, and our ability to be able to get, these kinds of videos just gets better and better. But
so you're saying there's an app possibly for this?
That's right. There's an app for it.
There's an app.
We don't say that anymore, but that was a good line back in the day.
I miss it. The fact that it's been so long dates me, but it used to make a great punchline.
It did. I cannot answer your question right now because there is a good answer, but I don't have it. There is some fact out there about how many people have access to this equipment, where those people are, how willing they are to receive Beatboxers, and how easy it is to get this kind of data and how much money it costs, and like all that stuff gets wrapped into the story. And I simply don't know enough details to speculate about it.
One thing I wanted to look at here is I wanted to look at the difference on the spectrograms again and on the waveforms to try and denote texture-wise how different are the sounds above the frequencies when we're talking about more of like the distinguishable overtones and not just the pitch between vibration and also throat bass, because they sound dramatically different, but how much of that is a perception of pitch versus a dramatic change in the overtone series?
Sure. We can definitely look at some examples. Fundamental frequency is something that, like,
one might say it's fundamental to our perception of the sound.
It's true. Let me pull up a good example. Well, let me pull up any example to start. I want. Nope. I want. Okay, I'm gonna go back to the throat bass, and okay, so we're back to the beat rhyming example. Here's bin. I'm gonna cut out the whatever came just before this, just to not have that there. So on the left we have the kick drum, and it looks like we capped out in what the microphone could stand there. Nice strong kick drum. the kick drum ends around here, and then we start seeing some periodic vibrations, which begin to change in the throat bass. This is what we saw before. Here is the plain phonation, the just the vocal folds,
Mhm.
and then
Can this particular software, when we get to the overtone series, because I know we can look at the waveforms and discuss some generalized about the overtone series and how that might work. But with this software, can we get a expanded vertical view of the spectrogram so that it doesn't kind
yes,
of
we're going to look at that
Okay.
and the spectrum as well.
Okay.
I just
Excuse
want to
me.
first it's reorientation to make sure we're all on the same page about what we're seeing. Plain voicing, followed by throat bass. The vocal folds are vibrating at a consistent frequency that we saw earlier, and so I think it's like 160 hertz or something. And the true during the vibration bass, they keep doing their vibration, but the false vocal folds also come in, cutting off every other air puff, causing a lower sound. We looked at that just by measuring waveforms earlier, measuring how long the lowest cycle was. But my actual favorite way is to use the spectrogram, as you suggested. So I'm going to zoom in a little farther here, because it's going to make it easier to do when we look at the vibration bass. So in this first section of the plain voicing, we can see in the spectrogram now here, the top section's a waveform, bottom section's called a spectrogram. A spectrogram shows a different view of sound. It's actually three-dimensional. It shows time on the x-axis, frequency on the y-axis. So the higher up we go, the higher the tone, if you will, the higher the tuning fork you would need in order to express whatever is happening on the y-axis.
We can say frequency. I think that would.
Okay, great.
Yeah. If someone doesn't know frequency, they're going to need a lot of help to understand half of the stuff in this video anyway. So.
Well, that's true.
Sounds are made up of frequencies, y'all.
It's a lot. Yeah. The frequencies are shown at different amplitudes, and the amplitudes of the frequencies change across time. The spectrogram is created by doing some decomposition of the waveform. It's mathematically very interesting, and we're not going to talk about it, but you can see the overtones as the dark bars. All the harmonics are dark bars. And in any segment, the lowest dark bar, horizontal dark bar, is the fundamental. And you can double check that it's the fundamental if all the other dark bars on top of it are whole number multiples of it. So down here, the fundamental for this section is about 165. It depends where I click. It's not that precise in this view. If I go up to the next harmonic, I get something like 322, which is about 160 times 2. If I go up to the next one, I get 480, which is about 160 times 3.
Mm-hmm.
So in this section, the pitch is going down, but sort of in the middle, I'm looking at a fundamental frequency of somewhere around 160, 170, and then we have the second harmonic and the third harmonic up here. These stay the same, but you can see that when the throat bass comes in, we introduce new harmonics. So I can trace the fundamental through the throat bass, but suddenly it's no longer the fundamental because there's a new harmonic in town that shows up below it. And every harmonic on top of it is a whole number multiple of that new fundamental. This new fundamental is about 75 hertz, and 75 times 2 is about 150, which is close to 160. If we look at the next harmonic above it, we're at, I think it's usually closer to 25. We're looking at fairly evenly spaced multiples here.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them are the same as the vibrations we saw before from the true vocal folds, and the others are in between. If you want, you can calculate the pitch by counting how many harmonics there are within a certain span of frequency. So when the true vocal folds are vibrating on their own, there are 1, the fundamental, 2, the second harmonic, 3, the third harmonic, 3 harmonics within 500 hertz. And if there is an app for this, if I take out my calculator and do 500 divided by 3, I get 166, which is about what we saw as the fundamental here. If I then go over to the throat bass section and count how many harmonics there are, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, that's suddenly 6 harmonics within 500 hertz. I know it's 500 because that's the view that I set it to over here. I can see 0 to 500 that I'm looking at. If I go back to my calculator, I'm doing 500 divided by 6 now. That's a fundamental of 83, which is about what we see here. I'm going through all of this because it's one thing to look at the spectrogram and sort of see all the harmonics laid out and you can see how they're changing over time. If we want to look, like you asked, at what's happening across the spectrum for those kinds of differences, we want to first know what we're looking at in the spectrum, and second, have a sense that it is the same thing we expected to find in the spectrogram. So we know from the spectrogram we're looking for harmonics around 80 hertz, so starting at 80 hertz and going up the whole number of multiples from there. I'm going to pick 100 milliseconds. I'm going to get a spectrum out of this. And you can't see this yet, I don't think. But I'm going to pull up... I'm going to change the setting here. And then share a different screen. I know I went on about that for a second, but I feel it's important to make sure we know what we're looking at in the different views.
While we're doing that, someone said something that I think would be interesting to discuss. Was the volume? Poofster says the volume of the new fundamental looks to be slightly less.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. And that's because
if we're talking about the fundamental on the low end,
on the throat bass.
Okay, that could easily be explained by a roll off on a microphone.
Yes,
among other things. It's
Yep.
hard to know what the origin of that is, but yeah, there could be.
It could be the microphone. It could be the resonance in the vocal tract. The vocal tract is keyed into some resonances, but not others. As you change its shape, it manipulates different frequencies, but maybe it's not manipulating, like maybe it's not accentuating something that's as low as 75 hertz.
It's quite a large waveform. That's how large? It's a couple feet at 75, right? It's much larger than the vocal tract itself.
I forget how it all works in distance.
Let's see.
I always do it in time.
So,
things that are low from the voice tend to be quiet anyway. There's a tendency for that just because of... I picked 100 milliseconds of the throat bass, and across all that time took... It's sort of like an average of all the frequencies, and they show up as these peaks. So, because it's a very periodic vibration and there's not tons of noise in the signal, we see lots of these individual peaks, which are all of the harmonics. So the one on the far left is at 80 hertz, which is what we said the throat bass fundamental was for this moment. The second harmonic is 160, which is twice the fundamental. The third harmonic is 240, which is 3 times the fundamental. The fourth harmonic is 320, which I'm pretty sure is 80 times 4. 400, they're all these very evenly spaced multiples of 80 hertz, which is the fundamental frequency that you get when your vocal folds are vibrating at 160 hertz and your ventricular folds are cutting off every other puff of air. That's the frequency. So all these harmonics are expected to be whole number multiples all the way up to infinity. What you're asking about is the amplitudes a little bit. I mean, so like, if you removed the head and had only the larynx doing its vibrations with the ventricular folds, then these vibrations we'd expect to follow a very particular kind of pattern, where the ones closer to the low end of the frequency spectrum are higher amplitude, and there's a roll off as you get higher up in frequency, just because the higher frequency vibrations are smaller, so they have less amplitude. But because our heads exist, we have these vocal tracts that cause some frequencies to be resonant and others not so much. This is the word bin, so the vocal tract is in a very particular shape where the tongue is probably a little bit high and forward in the vocal tract compared to if it were, say, down and back for an ah. And so we expect that there will be some energy in the relatively lower frequencies, a low clumping of them over here. We got a little bit of a peak here, and then we have another formant around here. All these like swaths of high energy, where like several harmonics are high energy. They're called formants, and they're the resonant modes of the vocal tract. This is the first resonant mode of the vocal tract in this shape, and around here is the second formant, which seems to be around 1800. The third formant is over here. And if this were an opera singer singing very operatically, at least under certain conditions and for certain voice parts, we might expect that some of these formants over here would be closer together to try to generate more amplitude that would help the voice be heard over an orchestra.
And that, yeah, and human,
Mhm.
the perception of human hearing is also why that is significant in the context of opera,
Yeah.
where the around 3,000 hertz, the human ear has peak sensitivity, which is why we hate to hear babies crying and why it sounds so piercing. That's my lazy Darwin.
It's probably not a bad answer. I'm not so familiar on the hearing, but I can tell you that when my baby cries, it causes me a deep emotional pain, which is probably connected to my ears, but it's
Yeah.
also connected to my heart. So I'm talking about all of this because you asked me about what the whole spectrum looks like and what the harmonics look like in these different cases, the throat bass and the vibration bass. And from the linguist's perspective, we expect a couple things. The first thing we expect is that there's going to be a fundamental and there's going to be harmonics that are whole number multiples of that fundamental. We got that. The second thing we expect is that there are going to be formants because the vocal tract is in some shape. Those formants will reflect basically vowel quality. And we can actually predict, not like really accurately, but we have some general ideas of where we expect certain formants to be, certain vocal tract resonances, based on what vowel a person is saying or singing. And so I expect to find first formant pretty low, 400 is fairly low, and second formant for I, it's a bit more of a high mid vowel, 1800, fairly reasonable. So I expect to see actually this kind of shape, and it doesn't have much to do, or it may not have much to do with the nature of the throat bass itself. The distribution of the amplitudes of the harmonics may be more related to the shape of the vocal tract than to anything that's happening to create specifically the throat bass as opposed to creating a vibration bass.
Okay, that makes sense.
But let's take a look at a vibration bass because I think that could be fun.
Yeah, I'd be interested in seeing how the. I mean, we'll see. We'll see how it happens here.
We gotta look. We gotta find
exactly, out. Exactly. The
out.
suspense.
If we're looking at the vibration bass we looked at before, I'm looking at.
Oh man, yeah, you can see it coming in and out like nuts.
Yeah. Okay, so we're looking at within 500 hertz again. With this, so I think there's some throat bass early on here, but actually, you don't see those harmonics very clearly higher up. It's a very quiet throat bass.
Mm-hmm.
So here, there's not many harmonics even up to 500 hertz. You just see the first three. but here they are, and they're at about the same frequencies as the other voice. For the true vocal fold vibration, you see much clearer harmonics, and if I just quickly change the spectrogram, instead of up to 500 hertz, I'm looking at 5,000. Oh, that's a lot.
Yeah, that's a lot.
That's right.
Yours is much more sensitive than mine.
Well, I've got the dynamic range up pretty high. I could turn it down.
Gotcha.
Let's try 50. That helps a little bit. So I can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. They get kind of lost up in here. You can sort of see some harmonics popping out, but there's not tons of them here. So in this voice, we're not seeing tons of energy above 750 hertz. Though if we were to look all the way up to 10,000, we actually find more energy coming back in closer to 7,500 hertz, which is not where we usually think of the voice as exerting a lot of control over what frequencies are amplified. But I don't know, maybe it's relevant.
It depends on the mic. A lot of microphones have a 10K bump, like a lot of them.
Interesting. Okay,
yeah.
So maybe that's it. For a linguist, I usually focus on 5,000 hertz and below, unless I'm looking at noisy sounds like fricatives, and then I'll bump it up to this high. But so we're getting quieter things over here. That's important because it is quieter at the beginning than at the end. If we were to drag this over, I look toward the end of the recording where things got really loud. The energy gets a lot darker down here. Let's take a look at this part. So this is vibration base. I'm going back down to, let's look at 2,000 hertz. Oh yeah. Okay.
That's a wild sound.
There's plenty of energy. Let's do 4. Okay. So there's plenty of energy happening throughout here. It looks like, I would say this is the first formant, second formant, third formant. This looks to me like it's going to be something like an ah.
It's an owl with the mouth closed, sounds like, right?
Something like that.
Yeah.
So if we zoom in a lot farther on the frequencies, each of these horizontal lines is a harmonic. And the lowest one I can see right now is 71. But if we go back earlier, maybe, you can see
it kind of dips. Yeah, every now and then it seems to dip into the 30. Yeah, and you can. Yeah,
that's right. But it's so quiet, and to your point, how the human ear perceives things makes a difference here. Yeah. So whether the lack of amplitude at the fundamental here is because it actually is very quiet, or because it's something to do with the microphone.
It's almost certainly the microphone is going to play a big part in this. Many microphones, particularly ones that are on like your phone or something, it's just the diaphragm is not large enough in a lot of ways.
Oh,
there's also intentional rolling off in a lot of cases, because if you're on your phone and you have unless this is why kick drum mics exist. This is why microphones for specific low end things exist, and we're operating in a frequency range where we're talking about a kick drum, where a kick drum is going to be about 60 hertz, right? Mm-hmm. So this is low.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so great. So the microphone probably had something to do with it.
Yeah.
But even so, the human ear still hears a pitch of about 35 hertz. And the reason is because when we are perceiving pitch, we are perceiving something more akin to the difference between all of the harmonics, rather than perceiving the fundamental. So there's these great experiments where they synthesize sounds, they create a bunch of harmonics, and then they take out the fundamental, or the first 4 harmonics, or the first 10 harmonics.
And we still see the bottom note, right?
You take out the bottom, but it doesn't change what note you think you're hearing.
Yeah, the human ear is kind of insane.
It's great.
The difference between like was it reverb and an echo is right on the money, 50 milliseconds of a delay.
Oh.
At 49 milliseconds, and this was one of my favorite things we did in audio class when I was taking audio engineering classes.
Yeah.
They played 49, and then they played 50 and 51, and it's like to the millisecond your ear will perceive. It's everyone in the class. It was universal. Like,
Wow.
holy crap! It's the human
That's
ear is
cool.
insane. Yeah, our perception was it the difference between a banana and a pear is like one molecule, and it couldn't taste any more different to us. Like, yeah, stuff. Human perception is incredible.
It's marvelous.
Yeah.
So we can do the same kind of analysis that we did before. We can count the harmonics in the spectrogram. We're not going to count the bottom one because it's not there. But if I do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, maybe an inkling of a 13 there. I'm looking up to 500 hertz here. I've got my calculator app now. 500 divided by 13, we're looking at 38 hertz. If I included the sort of vanishing first harmonic, 500 divided by 14, that's 35 hertz,
Yeah.
which is about what we found before. So you can calculate the pitch just by calculating how many harmonics there are within some interval of frequency. And you can do that because they're evenly spaced. If we take a look at just... I did 100 milliseconds before. Let's keep it even. Actually... Yeah, this is good. It's not too loud. If I take another 100 or so milliseconds here... I'm going to make a new spectrum. I'm going to zoom into the first 4,000 hertz, and I'm going to actually share with everybody. So now we're looking at the same thing we saw before for the throat bass, but now we're looking at the vibration bass. And
whoa,
it's a bit of a squigglier mess, especially early on. But the very first peak we see is at about 68 hertz. We have a missing fundamental. But then it's 102, which was about the fundamental frequency of the vocal folds when they were vibrating earlier. So we sort of know that there's 1, 2 subharmonics down beneath it. It looks like we're missing maybe the fourth harmonic to be around 143, but then we get 173 and 205 and 244, and these are all about 30 to 35 hertz away from each other. Looks like we're probably missing another harmonic there. This one's a little quieter.
So
why are these harmonics missing? So go ahead.
The populating of all these frequencies seems extremely there's just way more sound happening. I mean, that's a bastardization of an explanation, but like there just seems to be more sound happening in a vibration bass than a throat bass. Not only do you have more harmonics, you have a higher amplitude, and in the if I'm looking at this the right way,
yeah,
and you have a higher population of granted we're on an ah vowel instead of an so we are going to get more in this sort of area, right? But like there does seem to be more frequency sounds in general in a vibration bass than in a throat bass. Is that a fair statement, or is that an incorrect understanding of it?
What you're saying doesn't sound wrong. There's more harmonics, and so there's more frequencies that are active. It's closer to like... Honestly, it's kind of closer to flat noise.
Like noise,
if you have like a white noise machine,
yeah.
It's playing all the frequencies simultaneously, but sort of aperiodic sound.
Yeah.
And vibration bass is sort of kind of closer to that because you just have more frequencies being active as harmonics.
That would make it to our perception louder, correct?
In
in the same way that if you have a white noise machine playing on a speaker, you are going to perceive that as louder just because there's more stuff going on. I know, like, maybe
Oh,
a better analogy would be like when you put distortion on a guitar, that thing gets louder, right? So to our perception.
I can't speak to this.
Okay,
And it's going to depend on the microphone and how loud you were being and everything else.
for sure.
If you're doing vibration bass, you might be. Well, no. Nope, not sure. It's going to depend on a lot of things.
That's okay.
I think it could be
Yeah.
a lot of fun to have a beatboxer do throat bass and vibration bass at their quietest and their loudest. Same microphone setting, same room, same everything else, same vowel, same vocal tract posture. And if we get enough people doing that, then we could begin to do a comparison. Do people's throat basses tend to be quieter or louder than their vibration basses? That could be an experiment.
So I mean, we've gotten there's a lot. So the main takeaways seems to be that the big one is that vibration is going to see us having your hypothesis is that the ventricular folds are going to come in.
They're going to block. They're going to block 2 out of 3 puffs of air that the vocal folds let through,
as opposed to the throat bass, which is every other, basically.
That's right.
Which gives us the perception of well, not just the perception. I mean, it creates a lower pitch.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's a big one. The other thing is that because the harmonics are a multiple of the lower frequency, we're going to have more in the overtone series present in a vibration bass than we are a throat bass.
Yeah.
Okay. That's pretty neato. And then I'm going to try and find someone with a laryngoscope with a high speed camera. That's
please.
So one of the questions we had was that does tilting the larynx, is that one of the contributing factors? This was my own question on that one. And then there's a bunch of different ways. So this is how the spectrogram ends up getting its visual representation, right? Like you're removing the curtain of sorts behind it. This is basically an EQ curve in a way, right? Or is this an aggregate over time of an EQ curve?
I'm blanking on EQ curve, but what we're looking at right now is an aggregate over a chunk of time.
Okay, so never mind. Okay. All right. So this is how a spectrogram ends up doing its calculations. Is stuff like this. They said it's a bit more involved, but here is a different way to look at a spectrogram breakdown.
Yeah, this spectrum is a slice of the spectrogram, like it's a chunk of it, but it's also a bunch of waveforms that have been decomposed according to the frequencies that add up into them. And what we're seeing is a representation of, in one sense, what we're seeing is if you throw a whole bunch of tuning forks at a waveform and see how well they match up, the result is the spectrum, which shows you bigger peaks when the tuning fork was a better match.
How can we organize the information? Because there's going to be a difference, and we have Defiant here, who is a beatbox content creator who focuses a lot on education. And while we have Defiant in the chat, and while you and I are discussing, how can we organize all of this information in a way that helps people become better beatboxers? First of all, there's the difference of here's what vibration bass is colloquially versus here's what throat bass is, as far as what people say these things are. So we have the different samples, right? And then we can give this diagnostic of like, here's what we're looking at in the spectrogram when we look at a vibration. We can see that here's the waveforms, right? Here's how we look at the spectrogram. This is how we know or can infer rather that there's a demonstrable difference between this sound and this sound, right? And then the question becomes, how the shit do you practice it? that's not for me to know. I'll
No, not
ask.
me either.
Yeah, we'll get Defiance input in there. But so I'll try to organize that information then in that way, with like the 20 odd sounds that we have.
Uh-huh.
And I might enlist your help in being a bit more judicious about like here's the sample. Like I might try to next time like grab the criteria in which we would organize that and how we're going to organize the
Sure.
stuff like that,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
I want to put that someplace. But you had talked about so much in your email, and then there's you had a lot of thoughts on it, and this is kind of incredible. We've been at it for 2 hours of just talking about how these sounds work and the breakdowns of this and the body of work that exists on the
Yeah.
academic end of things. And yeah, there's a lot. Yeah,
It's fun for me because like the story is relatively simple once you know it, but trying to get to that story, know what the pieces are of the body and know what the pieces are of the technology and the physics that we use to analyze all those things, like you have to know a lot in
yeah,
order to be able to see how the story unfolds. Um, and I like that such a simple story. The difference between throat bass and vibration bass is that the vocal folds are always vibrating, but the false vocal folds are vibrating at different rates. That's like, it's simple to say, but to unpack it takes a
yeah,
lot.
yeah. I
Um,
mean, it's like basically we just spent the last 2 hours trying to justify why this is your hypothesis.
mhm.
And there's more to it, but like we also don't have time for everyone here to get a doctorate. Right, this is your attempt to kind of sandwich it together.
Mhm.
So okay, yeah, I think the hypothesis is definitely fair, and I'm super interested in pursuing that idea. I want to find. I don't know who to even reach out to. Is there an email list? Like,
I'll see what I can do about that.
yeah.
Um, I'm also excited to look at other types of vibration that people do, other types of phonation patterns, inward and outward, and uh, seeing if there are nice ways to look at them in a spectrogram and in a waveform and say, well, you know what, even there's these quantitative and qualitative differences between all of these, and so if you ever want to know what kind of base you have, you can use these diagnostics to figure it out. I'd love to keep looking at more of these.
What I'll do is I'm going to before I ask a bunch more people to submit a bunch more different sounds. What I want to do is I want to make sure that I have this sort of body of work categorized and like
Mm,
that it's useful for the practitioners. I want to build
yeah.
that bridge because it's fun for you and I, and
Uh-huh.
but I love learning from you how to look at these things more from the scientific point of view. But I do want to build that bridge in this
Which should
channel
be useful.
between, yeah,
Yeah.
it should be tangible and useful, and it is. But if we could, in 2 weeks from now, I'll organize everything a little bit better. I'll try to understand
Mm,
a Discord, and then we'll populate, like I'll fill out a template of sorts of like what it is that would be useful from a
yeah.
practitioner and a pedagogic point of view. And then
Hmm.
if I could get your help, like basically filling that out,
Yeah.
with your
I hope
observations.
people are gonna like in the Discord ask about or I would love to know how the very specific things that we talked about here could be applied. Is there a way to is there a use for this kind of technology, or is that sort of not interesting? Is there a use for knowing about the specifics of the anatomy, or is that not interesting? Like,
So the model in which that I base a lot of my particular education
mm,
on is, well, one of the models that I use is Estel, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with Estel, Joe
not
Estel.
super
The
familiar.
Okay, Joe Estel we did a lot of great work in the '90s. I don't know if I would say it's pioneering work, but she explored a lot of like voice stuff like belting and took a broader
Hmm.
view of singing, and her work, there's a nonprofit that culminates her work into like a kind of more of an approach,
Hmm.
and they use spectrograms, they use a sort of like a they have their own pedagogical approach using a lot of this information. And one of the great ways to do it is like there's a lot of questions that people will end up having of why of like, how do I know if I'm singing falsetto? How do I know if I'm belting? How do I
Hmm.
know if I'm singing in head voice or whatever? And they try
Mhm.
to give people tools of saying, well, if you look at a spectrogram, that's how you know. This is how you can self-diagnose and answer some of
Okay.
these questions.
Mhm.
And luckily for most people, like the bar of the questions that they're trying to answer is generally pretty low. It's pretty
Uh-huh.
quantifiable.
Yeah.
So is this throat bass or versus vibration bass? We have an answer for that on a spectrogram, basically, right? What it is exactly that is happening, no, we can't answer that exactly. We have an idea, but we can pretty safely say when people say vibration bass, this is the sonic pattern you're looking for. When people say throat bass, this is the sonic pattern you're looking for. That in and of itself is really great because there's so many questions of like, is this inward bass or is it inward vocal fry? Is this chest bass, right? And there becomes a lot of convoluted, like people don't know how to answer the question. So do they want to, make gajillion recordings and post them on Reddit, or do they want to just come to a Discord and download a free program, record it, and then look at what the information is? And it would accelerate the learning process tremendously. So it is absolutely pragmatic in that way.
Great.
So yeah.
Great. Yeah.
Yeah. As far as answering the question, that's more of you and I have an indulgence, so we want to.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
I think there is interest in that. But in terms of the translation of whether or not it's useful to practitioners, yeah, it'll be just a matter of very clearly stating this is the pattern of this sound. Here's how you go about finding it in your own way. And so that'll be because I imagine that the app you're looking at is not available on mobile.
No.
So yeah, usually I
It's
use
not.
Academo, which is Academo is a browser-based
Oh.
spectrogram that they have hosted on Academo, and that can use a microphone. Yeah, you could probably even pull it up right now, Academo spectrogram, and you can just click mic on it, and they'll ask for permission on your web browser. Can you use the microphone? And some people have had a hard time getting it to work on certain devices, but whenever I want people to be able to do it on a mobile way, like that's an option. And that's just a link. So that's been helpful in terms of getting that to work.
Oh, fun.
Yeah, isn't that nice that it's so readily available?
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. Yeah. So if we could translate, because like your software is very, I mean, it's dope to use the technical term, but I want to see if we can translate some of these things to tools that are really super approachable and available on like mobile, because there are a lot of kids who practice beatboxing and they're not going to have a laptop, they have a phone, etc. So, yeah.
Yeah, great. That has good use for the linguist too, because we're always looking for new tools we can use to help people do this kind of thing for just like talking.
Yeah. All right, so that'll be in 2 weeks. We'll try to. I like this cadence of let's go crank it up to 11 and try to figure out at least 11 on YouTube end of things, of getting as technical as is possible and qualifying everything as much as possible. Because I believe very much in qualifying when you're trying to get to the basis of something. Like you have to qualify your shit. And obviously your bar higher than mine because of the arenas that we're in inherently, but this is why you're here, and I super appreciate your time and your expertise.
I'm so glad to be here.
I fucking love this. Thank you so much. It's a privilege.
I have a great time as well. I'm really happy that I get to keep talking about beatboxing, and I hope people like it.
People like it. If not this, I mean, this is kind of a certain brand of nerd that has to stay here for 2 hours and listen to this, and they exist, and they're here right now. And I thank you for coming in, guys. But the more pragmatic, tools and stuff like that will have wider appeal, and then the widest appeal is going to be when we get into, which if we want to do this, like we take celebrity beatboxers and we back and forth on that stuff as well.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah,
that'd be great.
So
that sounds great. Yeah, let's keep going.
All right, and then we'll get into the inward bass, which is a big point of contention. And
yeah, I want to get into the inward bass.
Defiant raises his hand, the nerd. Yeah, inward bass is a big one for me personally too. It's hard to know when I'm doing it, when I'm doing inward vocal fry. They're different kinds of inward bass. Inward tends to be this one that's a little bit more mysterious for me and for many. And it'd be interesting to find those patterns when after we're done with this to be able to get into inward vocal fry versus inward bass. So
it sounds great.
All right, awesome.
All right,
thank you. I'll let you go because you've been giving us 2 hours of your time, and I appreciate it.
Well, I gotta pick up my baby from daycare.
Yeah, I guess that's probably an important thing to do.
Yeah. I mean, I miss him a lot, and I've only been thinking about him the entire time I've been here. It's fine. Not a big deal.
That's adorable.
Yeah.
I have a puppy. That's the extent of mine.
Thank you for having me, and we'll be in touch.
All
right.
Take care.
Bye, everybody.
What? That was super dope. Yeah, we want we didn't get to the large sample size that we got from everybody today. But man, did it help. Because one of the biggest problems is, we use a lot of jargon as we try to navigate the specifics of the aesthetics and all that stuff, right? So like false chord vocal fry versus inward bass versus this person's inward bass, right? And the only way to really try to zero in on these sounds in a way that's a little bit more grounded, because it's not that when people say these things that they're wrong to point it out or wrong to try and differentiate it, because the reality is that there's so many sounds, there's so many ways to make those same sounds, and there's so many variations that the differentiation is useful. However, when we have an aggregate, like we had with throat bass and vibration bass, when we have a lot of different examples, Dr. Blaylock can go through all of them and be like, here are the patterns that distill exactly what we're trying to look for, right? So that, and like chest bass versus vibration versus throat, that's probably an interesting discussion in and of itself. So by getting these larger samples of people contributing on different microphones, on different experience levels and stuff like that, that's really kind of useful. And also is because he's a linguist, so he's particularly well suited, because the study of linguistics is sort of a study of what is a communal understanding of language. So he's perfect for this. And right now, I often go into a weird, quiet, false fold screen when I try and go into vibration. So one of the things that I wanted to see defined, one of the things I want to get scoped for with a high-speed camera is, for me, the difference between vibration and throat is just the laryngeal tilt. You can see that I just tilt. And for me, that's how I associate it with it, right? But as we've established time and time again, just because I think and I think that's what I'm doing doesn't mean that's what's happening, right? So, yeah, it's a weird one. Sometimes I have that issue too, Okun. I'm gonna hop into the Discord chat if y'all want to chat about this stuff and on voice chat, because I'm gonna be in do I have just like a general voice chat? I have practice. Beatbox live chat. There we go. So I'm in voice chat if anyone wants to hop in. I know that Osad, apologize if I'm mispronouncing that. Did you wanted to talk about some help on some certain things? We can hop in and chat about that. But I'm super interested in how I can make this, because this was really cool for me, because this will help with everything that I do in terms of like qualifying and getting into the details, but getting into how to make this pragmatic is going to be a challenge, because it involves me pruning things. and getting a lot more distilled. But this was awesome. Oh, my dog needs to eat. Let me throw some stuff in the air fryer, and let me play some. I don't want to play anything that's too ridiculous, but so yeah, well, I'll be in the Discord. I'll link that again. Yeah, low vocal bass vibration would be nice. Like all of these permutations and stuff like that. It's just the sample size helps us cut through some of the language barriers, and some of the jargon. Oddly enough, by having more of it and identifying patterns in the sounds themselves, we can probably kind of get into a point where we're a bit more intentional about the jargon. So I'm gonna post the Discord link and YouTube chat, and I'll see you guys in there. I gotta feed my dog before he like turns off my computer, as he sometimes wants to do. So I'll see you in there in a bit. Okay. Thanks for stopping by. See you in Discord chat. I'll be in the Beatbox live chat. If you guys can't get to it, tell me in general. I'll move you in.